We have voted for Jovenel, but we do not agree with him, his policy. Then he has to go. Today we are all here. We come from Salino, Base 47, Site Salil. Although the police are shooting, we are not afraid of anything. We are sure that we will do what we have to do.
At least 4 have been killed as anti-government protests continued in Haiti's capital Port-au-Prince on Monday. Many Haitians are demanding the resignation of President Jovenel Moïse. The government has responded with a violent crackdown. 2 journalists were shot during the protests. This is one of the protesters who took to the streets on Monday.
The people are fighting, and they, the government, are repressing it. The town is on the street to dismiss Jovenel. To expel Jovenel means solution to hunger. To dismiss Jovenel means solution to the murders in the popular neighborhoods as we see it in La Saline, Tokyo, Grand Ravine, and Fort National. Being on the street is a political battle against the system.
Many Haitians have called for Moïse to stand down after what they describe as a failure to address Haiti's myriad of problems like widespread food and fuel shortages, a weakening currency, double-digit inflation, and graft accusations lodged against public officials, which have crippled the impoverished Caribbean nation. Protesters also burnt at least a couple of cars, including a police car, in the latest round of civil unrest. Now joining us to discuss this is Jacqueline Charles, who's reported on Haiti and the English-speaking Caribbean for the Miami Herald for over a decade, a Pulitzer Prize finalist for her coverage of the 2010 Haiti earthquake. She was awarded the 2018 Maria Moores Cabot Prize, the most prestigious award for coverage of the Americas. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So give us the latest from the ground. The president is in hiding. It doesn't seem like there's any relief for the poor in sight. They're suffering from economic crisis, food and fuel shortages, and this is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere.
Well, Haiti is having a very difficult time these days, and Haitians definitely. As you mentioned, double-digit inflation, which is nearly at 20%, chronic fuel shortages on top of food shortages, rising costs, and basically you've had more than a year of protests where both the opposition and also individuals on the streets have been asking for President Jovenel Moïse to resign from office. Basically, their position is that there is inept governance. He has been missing in action. The population heard from him during a pre-recorded 2 a.m. address on the 25th of September, but prior to that, he had not been seen or heard from in public for over a month. And when he gave that address, it was a 15-minute. He told the opposition that he was ready to have dialogue with them, but the international community had basically spent more than a year asking President Moïse to come to the table and to have negotiations. And what the opposition is saying today is that it is too little, too late. And they are vowing to keep the streets hot, to keep the country barricaded on lockdown until President Jovenel Moïse steps down.
And we were talking off camera. You were saying that at least Port-au-Prince is calm today. And so the protesters are sort of figuring out their tactics because while they want to keep this pressure on, they have to realize that, or they have to consider the fact that people still need to go about their daily lives and get food and fuel, whatever they can find.
I have to tell you, by my estimation, the country's been locked down for about 5 weeks. I mean, it started with a fuel shortage that basically ran into 4 weeks. And then just when the fuel arrived and people were about to get some relief, we had this incident on Monday where the supporters of the president in the Senate were attempting his latest choice for prime minister. That ended in chaos with a journalist, a colleague of mine who works for the Associated Press, basically getting shot in the crossfire, him and a security guard. Right there, you had spontaneous protests. People took to the streets of Port-au-Prince. And then 2 days later, when President Moïse issued his address to the nation, the population gave him their response. And they lit the streets up again. These protests have been very violent. They've been very aggressive. And as you heard in your clips there, people are saying that, you know, it's hunger, it's ineptness, they're not getting any relief. And this idea of corruption, scandal after scandal, even for Haitians who are used to it, their threshold has just had enough.
And so some of the roots of this latest protest come back from the fallout of corruption and mismanagement of Venezuela's oil subsidy program and a plan to end that, which, you know, for And so, can you explain that a little bit? Because the intention was to help fight climate change by ending fuel subsidies, but what was not calculated is how much the poor in Haiti depend on these fuel subsidies. Can you explain what happened there?
Yeah, so Haiti, like a number of Caribbean and Central American countries, was part of the Petrocaribe program with Venezuela. Basically, instead of paying upfront for fuel, they were allowed to pay their fuel bill over 25 years at a 1% interest rate. So let's say the $1 million that I was supposed to spend on fuel for this year, instead of giving it to Venezuela, I had that money to invest it in social programs to help alleviate the suffering of the poor. Well, according to a court of auditors in Haiti, $2 billion of this, at least, have been embezzled. And the current president is accused of receiving millions of dollars in bogus government contracts for road projects that were never completed prior to him running for office. And so he was implicated, or he is implicated, in this corruption scandal. And when that came out on May 31st, that just lit up another round of violent protests. But prior to this, let's remember last July, again, as Haiti is no longer receiving fuel from Venezuela, it's getting a fuel bill that's rising, and the government provides subsidies. And the government is saying, listen, we've got a $2 billion budget for a country of basically 11 million people. We can't afford this. So we need to raise fuel prices by removing these subsidies. In addition, they were under a lot of pressure from the international community. But the way they did it was just sloppy and haphazard. They did it during a World Cup game with Brazil where they thought that people would have been distracted. And as soon as that game was over and the population realized what the government has done, they took to the streets, they barricaded, they put tires on fire. I mean, throughout the country, it was on lockdown, and we had 3 days of basically rioting. International flights were canceled, and that was the first of several lockdowns. Come now to September, we are in week 3 and 4, fuel shortages, long lines, and the country has a fuel bill of $130 million. And this has been a chronic problem. Blackouts, no fuel to go anywhere. Myself, I was caught in this. You can't go very far because you don't know if you're going to find fuel. And the irony is that in the country, but because the gas station owners do not know when fuel is going to arrive, they are being very careful in terms of opening their stations. So you're seeing people walking around or standing in line with these yellow jugs, just basically looking for fuel or waiting for fuel. And even when the government gets fuel, then after a while, there's no fuel. So again, Haiti has not been able to make the adjustment post-Venezuela Petrocaribe in terms of how do you get fuel into this country and you can basically pay your fuel debt.
And so finally, it's sort of impossible to talk about Haiti without talking about history, and goes back to being the first successful slave revolt, the first successful worker revolt. And many argue Haiti's been punished to this day for defying Europe and America in abolishing slavery and throwing off the yoke of colonialism. And even more recently, there's been Western influence and interference in elections. And we're about to mark the 10th anniversary of the devastating 2010 earthquake. Haiti's still rebuilding from that. Talk a little bit about the role the West continues to play in Haiti, continuing to support the current government, and have alternatives been put forth by the opposition to sort of have a different policies besides the austerity that you've just described?
Well, when you talk to Haitians on the ground, they will tell you that the root of this crisis isn't just the corruption allegations, the mismanagement of the economy by President Jovenel Moïse, but it dates back to the elections, and not just the 2015 elections, but the 2010 elections after the earthquake, when the international community, led by the United States, decided or concluded that there was fraud. So they kicked out the second candidate and they put in President Michel Martelly. They went from left to right. And we have seen a number of issues since then. Again, in 2015, when President Martelly's handpicked successor, Jovenel Moïse, ran for office, those elections also were problematic. We went into a transition, and then they had new elections. But President Jovenel Moïse has not had it easy, neither as a candidate nor since he's come into office. I mean, the opposition really has not given him much of a breathing room. But he also has not done a lot to say, hey, let's have a real coalition government. You cannot rule this country or govern this country without bringing in the traditional opposition, regardless of how you think of them. Today, we were talking about Venezuela. I mean, Haiti decided after years of showing loyalty to Venezuela and Hugo Chavez and Maduro, that it broke with Maduro and it sided with the United States in regard to the question of Maduro and whether or not he was legitimate. And so along with the United States, it decided to acknowledge Guaido. And that is continuing to play here in the backdrop. Because of that decision by Haiti, President Jovenel Moïse does enjoy support from the United States, which hasn't really been paying much attention, at least from the State Department and the Trump administration. Really been paying attention to this crisis. But psychologically on the ground, even among those who are battling him, the question is, where does the U.S. stand? Just yesterday, there was a meeting between the opposition and the U.S. ambassador, as well as the representative for the United Nations, France, Canada, and other countries there. And the meeting was not a very good meeting. I mean, it was very strained. The international community was very clear on their position. They want the opposition to go to the table, to negotiate, to have dialogue. The opposition, meanwhile, is saying, no, they are not going to do it. But the foreign community known as the core group, they're not letting up. So the question now is going to be whether or not the opposition is going to crack under this foreign pressure, this Western pressure. But, they also have to come up with a plan. I mean, to understand the international community, you don't want chaos. You have a situation now where, yes, the president may not be present. He might be missing in action. There are issues of the economy and governance, but at least I know what I have, right? Right now, the Constitution of Haiti does not provide for what happens next if President Jovenel Moïse resigns. He currently has no legitimate prime minister. And under the Constitution, if a president were to leave before his final year in office, it's supposed to be the prime minister who steps in. But because there is no legal prime minister, there is nobody to step in. So either way, President Jovenel stays, President Jovenel leaves, you're looking at chaos. I don't know what the answer is, but everybody says that it's for the Haitian people to decide.
Well, we want to thank you so much for that insight and for all your reporting. We'll link to it at therealnews.com, and we'll keep following this very important story. Haiti is a very important place. It's suffered so much because of the people of Haiti have suffered so much because of decisions that they've had no role in. And so we'll definitely keep an eye on things there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us at the Real News Network.